Interstates and highways. Watch out for weird pickup trucks that want to take you home, or men who pay you $50 to do something special on the road. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and don't forget to watch behind you. It's coming at 180. Rick, the long-haul trucker. I told my daughter the story the other day, thanks to being a little too inebriated on a bottle of white wine. And she told me about this subreddit and begged me to tell you all about it. My name is Jennifer, and I've been a casual Redditor for a long time now. Mostly I just like browsing Reddit pics and looking up cooking recipes. I've never been much for the creepy stuff, and I don't normally engage in threads on Ask Reddit, so this is new for me. This happened in 1985 when I was 17 years old. I was the youngest of my graduating class, and all summer I had been looking at colleges across the region. This is long enough ago that there wasn't any internet, and if you wanted to go to college out of state and you didn't have tons of money or connections, you'd actually have to take a trip. I was born in Seattle, but at this time, my family had been living in Mount Shasta, which is a small town in Northern California. I was unable to attend college on time with the rest of my friends because I ended up having to stay home and take care of my mother. She ended up being diagnosed with cancer at the end of summer, and my dad had to continue working 10 hours a day in order to pay the bills. So I took care of my mom for a year while my dad worked. Luckily, my mom didn't have to suffer for long. The cancer had progressed so far by the time they caught it that she passed in the fall. After my mother passed away, my dad made sure I started college as soon as possible. I knew I wanted to go to school in Seattle because the big city life was calling to me. Dad basically handed me $500 and the keys to his 1982 Chevrolet pickup and told me to go. And then when I got there, he'd send me money to get an apartment so I could make my way in the city before school started. He didn't want any obstacles in my way when it came to school. He felt guilty for having kept me home while my mom was dying. Not that I would have chosen to be anywhere else, but he was still feeling guilty. So in the middle of fall, I ended up driving my dad's truck north to Seattle. The trip is basically a straight shot from Mount Shasta to Seattle on Interstate 5. It should have been easy, but about halfway through Oregon, the pickup broke down. The coolant hose sprung a leak, and I was unable to repair it on the side of the road. Yes, back then, girls from small towns knew about cars. So I ended up walking on the side of the interstate, northward, in the direction of the next town. I had just passed a small town named Greene a while back, and the map said I was just south of a medium-sized town named Roseburg. I couldn't be sure how far away from Roseburg I was, but walking wasn't a problem for me, and Roseburg would be much more likely to have a repair shop. So even if it might be further away, it was totally worth the attempt. It was cold that evening, and the wind chill was cutting through my coat and causing me to hate life. I decided it would be best to hitch a ride to Roseburg since it was getting dark quickly. I thought I looked pretty hot back then, but even still, no one stopped to give me a lift. I kept walking north and putting my thumb out every time a car came up behind me. It was hours later when one finally stopped. It was a big red 18-wheeler that had no trailer attached. It pulled up in front of me and off to the side of the road and honked its horn. I ran up to the trunk, thankful that I could finally get out of the wind. As I opened the passenger side door of the truck, I saw a very friendly-looking man at the wheel. He smiled and said, "Come on inside." As I climbed into the passenger seat, he told me his name was Rick, and I introduced myself in turn. He asked me where I was headed, and I told him I needed to get to Roseburg to get a tow truck to pick up my vehicle I left a few miles back. He told me he'd been to Roseburg many times on his routes, and that there wasn't a repair shop or tow truck company open this late at night. He told me he would let me out at a motel so I can sleep the night and then get the tow truck to pick up my vehicle up the next morning. I thank him for his considerate nature. He really did seem kind and thoughtful. We weren't far from Roseburg, according to him, which made sense because we could just now begin seeing the signs of civilization amongst the trees on the side of the interstate. We made small talk while he drove the rest of the way. We discussed the cold weather, current events, and even sports. Somewhere in the conversation, he told me that I was very pretty. It caught me off guard, but he didn't say it in a creepy manner, so I merely thanked him and continued talking about sports. He didn't say anything after that, just kinda let me talk. You know that feeling when you realize you've been chatting on and on about something, and the other person hasn't said a word in a few minutes? Well, I got that feeling because he hadn't said a word since he told me I was pretty. I stopped and apologized for being so chatty and talking his ear off. He looked at me and smiled and said it was alright. He likes to hear my pretty voice. That time he did say it in a creepy way, but sometimes that happens. I doubt he meant to do that. I kept quiet in hopes he'd just start talking again and we'd discuss something else. Instead, we didn't say a word. He watched the road and I just sat there. In a minute, I began looking around the cab and I ended up looking in the back of the cab behind me. What I saw puzzled me. In the back there was a large brown blanket. Some clothes I'm sure were dirty and some shoes. The thing that puzzled me was that they weren't all his clothes and shoes. 2 pairs of the shoes were obviously little girl shoes, and some of the clothes were little girl's clothes. Something you'd expect a 10-year-old to wear. He knew I had seen it and laughed. He told me his daughter left those in the cab after she had accompanied him on a route last week. He told me he didn't get enough time to spend with her, so he took her on a route a week ago to spend some more quality time together. I said that was nice of him and asked how old she was. He paused for a second and then told me she was 13. That made me suspicious because not only did he hesitate before answering, but I've worked in a shoe store before, and I know those shoes must belong to a much younger girl, both because of the size and also because of the style. It also didn't seem like the kind of clothes or shoes you'd have a little girl bring on a trip like this. It was weird, but not scary. Also, having worked at a shoe store before, I was almost positive those shoes were 2 different sizes. I told him the shoes were cute and leaned back and grabbed one of them and proved it to myself that they had to be different sizes. And no way does a little girl wear 2 totally different sizes. Still, I wasn't really scared. I just thought he wasn't being totally honest, and that's his business, so I didn't really mind it. It's just a weird thing to be dishonest about, even to a stranger. I put the shoe back, and when I turned around, I saw the look on his face. He seemed half worried and half angry. I immediately apologized for touching his things, and he said it was okay, although it didn't look okay. By then, we were just entering Roseburg. We kept driving through the town, and he told me he knew a good motel on the far end of town, and he'd let me off there. He asked me what I brought with me in my backpack. It seemed like an innocent question, but it came off like he was interested in what I had on me, not simply whether or not I brought any clothes or a toothbrush. I told him I had enough, but I didn't tell him anything specific about the contents of my backpack. I didn't have a weapon of any type, just some socks, makeup, and my purse. We ended up passing a repair shop on the side of the road, and he pointed to it and told me that's the place I should go tomorrow morning to get a tow truck. It felt kinda strange to me because he didn't tell me it was coming up. He just pointed it out. I said I had missed it and asked what the name of the shop was. He responded just by telling me it was straight south off the interstate and I can't miss it, as if he didn't remember the name. At this point, I began to get a little worried. I didn't feel threatened by Rick, but he didn't seem to be legit. As we kept driving, I noticed we were now coming to the far north end of Roseburg, and that soon we'd be leaving the town behind. I asked him where this motel is, and he told me it was just north of town. I told him that was a little far from the repair shop for me, and asked if there was any place closer for me to stay. He didn't answer. Now I'm a little worried about Rick's intentions for me. I got my backpack and put it in my lap. He looked over and saw it and said if I was okay. I looked over and smiled at him and told him I was okay, just cold. You know those signs on the highway that tell you how far off the next rest stop is, or gas station is, or motel is? Well, they had those back then too, but usually only on the outskirts of a town. It's the town's way of motivating you to stop for a gas or lodging now where they can tax it, rather than continuing on and sleeping somewhere unincorporated. Well, we came up on one of those signs. It said that there wouldn't be a motel for 20 miles and that we were leaving Roseburg. I knew then that Rick wasn't taking me to a motel just past the town's limits. I didn't know what he wanted, but I didn't want it to happen. I looked over slowly to Rick, and luckily he hadn't seen the sign because he was busy lighting a cigarette. I began looking frantically out the window to see if there was any place I could make an excuse to stop at. Maybe I could ask to stop at a gas station for something to drink and then run away. There wasn't one open. I decided I'd have to pull out the big guns and ask them to pull over so I could pee. I looked over at him and asked if he'd pull over to let me pee on the side of the road. He pulled his lit cigarette out of his mouth and looked at me. He said, "You gotta pee?" And I shook my head yes. "Well, go ahead and pee then, Jenny," he told me. "I like the smell." And he smiled at me and it sent shivers down my spine. I pretended to laugh, and he frowned at me. "Don't fucking laugh at me, Jenny," he told me. I immediately stopped pretending to be fine, and so did Rick. He could tell I was scared now, and he just gave me this look like he wanted to hit me. I asked him where we were going, and he told me not to worry about that. At this point, I could actually see the end of Roseburg coming up ahead. No more lights after that, just woods. Immediately, I heard my dad's voice in my head telling me to run. Not to worry about getting hurt, just run. I opened the door and tried to jump out. The truck must have been going at 30 to 40 miles per hour. And as I moved towards the open door, Rick grabbed my backpack. He had been trying to grab me, but I was pressed against the far end of the cab. I heard my dad's voice again telling me to run, and I tried to pull my backpack away from Rick, but his grip was too strong. I gave up and just fell back out the cab and into the grass. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I rolled around in the grass till I came to a stop. Immediately, I sat up, despite the sharp pain in my back, and saw Rick's truck speeding up on his way out of town. He didn't stop. I got up and limped my way back into town, and ran up to the first home I saw and pounded on the front door. An old man opened the door looking very tired, yet also very worried. I begged him to call the cops, and when he saw the bruises on my face and grass stains on my clothes, he threw open the door and let me come in. He sat me on the couch while he ran to the phone. His wife came down to find me on the couch, crying, and him on the phone telling the local sheriff to come as soon as possible. She got me a glass of water and a blanket. They were both so nice to me. The sheriff arrived and expected me to be drunk at first. About halfway through my story, he realized I wasn't drunk, and there was truth to the story I was telling. He called up 2 deputies who were asleep at home and had them patrol north on the interstate, looking for a big red 18-wheeler. He even called up the next town north and asked them to send a patrol south. They didn't find any red 18-wheeler on the road, but they assumed he probably sped his way right through their town before they were even able to send out a patrol. The nice old couple who had let me in ended up letting me stay with them. The sheriff kept a deputy outside of the house all night. The next day, he took me to the station to fill out an official report and look at some photos of 18-wheelers so I could pick out the exact color and model. He drove me to the repair shop, which just happened to be the same one Rick pointed out to me. He had them tow my truck in and had the sheriff's department pay for it. They got my dad's pickup truck running in no time, and the sheriff asked me to stay in town for a few more nights. I was totally fine with that because I didn't want to meet Rick on the road again. I stayed at the old couple's home for 3 more nights and spent my days with the sheriff as we patrolled the interstate and called nearby towns asking if any truckers had pulled over, matching my description. $50? When I was about 13, I was walking a far distance along the highway to meet a guy. As I was walking to get to the highway, I noticed this one car go by several times. I assumed he was looking for something. Eventually, he drove by again but slowed down. I asked him what he was looking for, and he replied with, "I just wanted to offer you a ride." Being naive and lazy, I took the ride, assuming that nothing would happen. About halfway there, he looked at me and said, "Do you want to make $50? Not realizing what he wanted, I said, "How?" "Give me head." At this point, I was shocked, scared, and ready to do whatever it took to get away from this guy. "Let me out." I spoke as calmly as I could, but still sounding threatening. "I'm sorry, never mind." And he just kept driving. I repeated twice more, getting louder and angrier. He finally let me out, and I walked the rest of the way. I was absolutely shaken, and I've told few more people about this because, number 1, it was incredibly stupid, and number 2, it's one of the worst experiences of my life, and number 3, I'm ashamed I made such a decision to take a ride. I've seen the guy around town a couple more times and have a mini panic attack each time. Jerk on the highway. Sorry for grammar, spelling, or formatting errors. Several years ago, I had just graduated from high school and spent most of my time just running around with friends. My good friend Monica had moved to Columbus, Ohio, which was about a 3-hour drive from my hometown in eastern Kentucky. Me, my friends Mary and Caroline decided one late night to make the trip to visit Monica. Mary had a 1990 Crown Victoria with the bench seat in front. We were all 3 sitting up front together for the ride, just listening to music and being silly 18-year-old girls. About an hour and a half into the drive, we decided to stop at an all-night gas station to get coffee, cigarettes, and some gas. I got one of those gas station cappuccinos that come out of the dispenser. We got back in the car and pulled out of the parking lot. The road we were traveling on was a 4-lane highway with a grass median divider, so when we pulled out, we had to stop in the middle to wait for traffic to pass. It was while we stopped there that I took my first sip of the most vile, disgusting cappuccino I had ever tasted. I opened the door to pour it out, and suddenly Caroline, who was sitting in the middle, starts screaming for me to close the door. I look to my right, and there is a guy who looks to be in his mid-20s running as fast as he can towards my side of the car. I slammed the door shut, just as Mary peels out into traffic, leaving the guy standing there in the middle of the highway. We were terrified and kept talking about it for several miles up the road. It was probably around 5:30 a.m., so it was pretty dark, and we noticed headlights coming up fast behind us. We just knew it was the guy from the gas station. We tried speeding up, slowing down. He stayed right on our tail all the way into the next town. By this time, the sun was starting to come up, and we stopped at a red light when this red Chevy S10 pickup pulls up next to us. Sure enough, it was gas station creeper himself. He was a rather nice-looking guy, though, who looked like maybe he was going to work. He was wearing a white button-up and looked really clean-cut. But he had a crazy look in his eyes. Suddenly, he throws open his driver's side door, and the white button-up was all he was wearing. This guy was butt-booty-ass naked, jerking off in his truck at 6 a.m. in the morning on the highway. While being young girls, we were totally creeped out beyond measure. So we did what any young girls would do. We screamed, pointed, and started laughing at him. Then we made hand gestures to emphasize how small it was, which infuriated him. Then the light changed, and we sped off. He turned at the light. I don't know if he was embarrassed or if he really just had to get to work. Either way, it was totally creepy. So half-naked wanker near Columbus, Ohio, let's most definitely not meet again. Pregnant, harassed, and followed on highway. New to Let's Not Meet, and reading these reminded me of an encounter I had a couple years ago. I was driving to pick up my boyfriend at the airport, which was a 2-hour drive from home at the time. I'm what you would consider an attractive girl, and was driving my boyfriend's Dodge Diesel 3500, murdered out with moose bumper. He's an electrician in the oil field. I was about 7 months pregnant at the time, just driving, listening to my music. Totally normal day. Slow down to go through one of the smaller towns, and these guys pull up beside me. They start winking, waving, the whole sleazy guy thing. I'm assuming they couldn't see my belly, as I was higher up than them, lifted truck, but could see my pregnant tits. I looked at them, rather unimpressed I'm sure, and then just ignored them. I turn off to go onto the major highway, and they suddenly lay on the gas and cut me off. Okay, weird, whatever. Then once onto the highway, they suddenly slow down and start going probably 20 under the speed limit. So I pass and can see them waving at me in the peripheral. They then speed up again and start tailgating me. I speed up, they speed up, etc. They drove up beside me for probably 5 minutes, trying to get my attention, and I wasn't giving it. I was just really freaked out, and they would cut in front of me, then slam on the brakes. This went on for 30 minutes, till the next town. I stop at 7-Eleven and call my boyfriend, literally shaking. He was just boarding his flight. He says go to the police station. They had parked across the street from the 7-Eleven and were just sitting in their vehicle, watching me. So creepy. I then go to the cop shop, and they start following me again once I leave 7-Eleven. They followed me until I turned into the police parking lot, and then continued on when I pulled in and parked. Thank God nothing came of it, but to this day, I wonder what the fuck they had planned. Oh, and they were towing a horse trailer too, with no horses in it. So that also increased the creep factor.